Forget Billy the Kid. Move over, Jesse James. Today, we're talking about one of the deadliest, most controversial gunslingers in the history of the Wild West. His name? John Wesley Hardin. He wasn't just a gunslinger, he was the gunslinger. The kind of guy who could start a fight in an empty room, and by the time the dust settled, everyone was blaming each other for his temper. Born with a Colt in one hand and bad luck in the other, Hardin's life was a whirlwind of shootouts, jailbreaks, and the kind of tall tales that'd make even Paul Bunyan look modest. So strap on your spurs and hold on to your Stetson because things are about to get wild. John Wesley Hardin was born in 1853, the son of a Methodist preacher. Yep, the guy who would go on to be one of the most dangerous outlaws of the Wild West came from a devoutly religious family. You know what they say, nothing like a good sermon to make you want to rebel. But this kid didn't just rebel by sneaking out after curfew or skipping Sunday school. Oh no, Johnny had bigger plans, like shooting people before he could grow a beard kind of plans. By the time Hardin was 15 years old, he'd already killed his first man. And this wasn't some random duel. Hardin claimed it was in self-defense, which, to be fair, would become his go-to excuse for the rest of his life. After the dust settled from that first fight, young John Wesley knew he had a knack for this whole killing people thing. It was like a talent, just not the kind you'd want to brag about at family gatherings. Now, some teenagers spend their time worrying about acne or math tests, but John Wesley Hardin spent his worrying about Texas Rangers hunting him down. By 17, he was on the run, dodging lawmen, and piling up a body count that could rival a modern action movie. His youth wasn't wasted, unless you count all the bullets he wasted in the process. But why, you might ask, was Hardin always getting into gunfights? Well, let's just say the man had a sensitive disposition. If you crossed him, looked at him funny, or even breathed in his direction the wrong way, you could find yourself at the wrong end of a gunfight. He was a walking temper tantrum with a six-shooter, which is a pretty bad combination when you live in a place where talking it out usually involves reloading. By his early 20s, Hardin had developed quite the reputation, and not the good kind either. His name was whispered in saloons, often followed by the sound of a chair scraping across the floor as folks tried to get as far away as possible. Legend has it, Hardin once killed a man for snoring too loudly. Yes, you heard that right, snoring. Now, if that isn't taking light sleeper to a homicidal extreme, I don't know what is. That one event in particular helped cement John Wesley Hardin's reputation as a bona fide Wild West legend, and it's almost too wild to believe. In 1871, Hardin found himself in Abilene, Kansas, home to the infamous marshal, Wild Bill Hickok. Now, Wild Bill was the kind of guy who could control a rowdy town with just a glare, but Hardin was the kind of guy who didn't care about anyone's glare. The two briefly crossed paths, though remarkably, no bullets were exchanged, but Hardin still managed to stir up trouble on his own. While staying at a hotel in Abilene, Hardin shared a room with a man who had a snoring problem. For most folks, this would be an annoyance. For John Wesley Hardin, it was a mortal offense. Frustrated beyond belief, Hardin did what any reasonable person would do, if they were completely unhinged. He shot the man through the wall, killing him instantly. Hardin later claimed it was an accident, but that didn't stop him from making a swift exit from town, riding out before Wild Bill could catch wind of the murder. This incident became the stuff of legend, and Hardin's notoriety skyrocketed. He was now more than just an outlaw. He was the outlaw, a man so dangerous, even in his sleep, you had to be careful not to cross him. The truth is, he had a hair-trigger temper and a complete disregard for human life, or at least for the lives of those who crossed him. If John Wesley Hardin had a motto, it would probably be something like, "Why stay and fight when you can shoot and run?" By the early 1870s, Hardin's reputation as a killer was spreading like wildfire across Texas. And when you rack up that many bodies, it's only a matter of time before the Texas Rangers start taking a special interest in you. Hardin wasn't just an outlaw anymore. He was Texas's most wanted, and the Rangers were hot on his trail. But Hardin had a knack for slipping away, and his life on the run became a game of cat and mouse that lasted for years. He didn't just flee from town to town. He weaved a trail of chaos through counties, sometimes doubling back to throw off his pursuers. One of his most infamous close calls happened in 1874 when the Rangers finally cornered him in Comanche County. It looked like the gig was up, but Hardin wasn't one to surrender easily. During a tense shootout, he managed to escape by sheer luck and guts, killing a few lawmen in the process. This wasn't just any game of hide and seek, it was lethal. The Texas Rangers threw everything they had at catching him, but Hardin's ability to evade capture became almost legendary. He changed names, grew disguises, and even hid in plain sight on a few occasions. Hardin was a master of survival in a world where every lawman with a badge had him in their crosshairs. But like any good story, the law eventually caught up to him. In 1877, after more than a decade of mayhem, Hardin was finally captured in Florida, of all places, a place where the only thing more dangerous than the gators was John Wesley Hardin. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's it for Hardin. He's going to rot in prison for the rest of his days. But no, this is the Wild West, and the story is far from over. Hardin was sentenced to 25 years behind bars, and you'd think a guy like him would spend the time plotting his next jailbreak or starting prison brawls, but surprisingly, Hardin had other plans. During his time in prison, Hardin became a lawyer. Yes, you heard that right. The man who once shot a guy for snoring became a lawyer. Talk about character development. He studied law while locked up and even represented other inmates. Can you imagine the courtroom drama? Your Honor, my client was just defending himself. Much like I did several times. But don't be fooled into thinking prison turned Hardin into a saint. His temper never really went away. It was just redirected, let's say. After serving 17 years, Hardin was released from prison in 1894. And what does a newly reformed outlaw do after tasting freedom for the first time in nearly 2 decades? Does he settle down, live a quiet life, and open a bakery? No, of course not. Hardin went back to being Hardin, stirring up trouble, getting into fights, and reminding people that he hadn't lost his edge, just maybe his youth. He moved to El Paso, Texas, where he set up shop as, you guessed it, a lawyer. But Hardin being Hardin, he couldn't escape his past. The thing with outlaws is, they make enemies. And enemies, well, they remember you. In 1895, John Wesley Hardin's life came to an abrupt end, not in some grand shootout like you might expect, but in the back of a saloon. He was shot in the back of the head by John Selman, an El Paso lawman with a grudge. Hardin's final chapter wasn't exactly heroic, but it was a fitting end for a man who spent his whole life living by the gun. So what do we make of John Wesley Hardin? Was he a cold-blooded killer, or just a man shaped by the violent world he lived in? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. Sure, he killed a lot of people, some say more than 20, though Hardin himself claimed it was over 40. But in a time when violence was as common as dust in the wind, Hardin was simply playing the cards he was dealt. The problem was, he played every hand like it was a shootout. Today, Hardin's name isn't as well known as some of his contemporaries, but his legend still looms large in the annals of Wild West history. He was part of that rare breed of outlaw who lived fast, died hard, and left behind a trail of stories that are equal parts fascinating and terrifying. Love him or hate him, John Wesley Hardin was the real deal. A gunslinger who lived by his own rules, even if those rules often involved ending someone else's life. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this trip into the wild world of John Wesley Hardin, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on more stories from the Wild West.